Now, if you ask any British child what movie traumatized you most as a kid, I guarantee that a fair amount will say a little movie called Watership Down, an animated film based on a book of the same name, written by Richard Adams. But looking at the cover of this movie, it seems like just a simple, fun story following the adventures of cute little rabbits roaming around the fields. It's bright, it's colourful. I mean, look at all that lovely nature. How relaxing. But you see, this isn't the only cover. A much more appropriate preview of what this story has to offer comes from this cover right here, showing the silhouette of a rabbit looking up towards the sky as the sun sets, with a caption reading, "All the world will be your enemy, prince with 1,000 enemies, and when they catch you, they will kill you. But first, they must catch you." This cover is far more gloomy than the colourful rabbits and bright blue skies and rolling hills seen on the first. And the reason I think this cover is a more honest representation of this movie is that Watership Down, despite being aimed towards children, is a very gloomy, dark story, full of pain and tragedy. This isn't a colourful fairy tale world full of hope and cute little bunnies doing cute little bunny things. It's an honest and bleak look into the lives of wild rabbits, and the dangers they face every day just to stay alive, whether it be natural predators, destruction of habitat, or even other rabbits. But this movie is rated U for Universal, meaning any age can watch it. So like many people, I watched this movie when I was really young, and honestly, I'd forgotten a lot about it, but some scenes have still stuck with me all these years later because of just how haunting they are.
I couldn't get out. Everything turned mad. Warren, earth, roots.
So I thought after all these years, it was time to return to Watership Down and see if it was really as dark as I remember. So let's join these wild rabbits and take a look into the kids' movie that traumatized millions.
The field, it's covered with blood.
Blood?
The story begins with sweeping shots of the English countryside as we're introduced to the place that the rabbits call home, the Sandleford Warren, which is actually a real place in southern England.
But here they are. The fields that were covered in blood.
And this place has everything a rabbit might need to survive. It has grass and plants to feed on, holes in the ground to keep them warm and safe, away from all the scary predators which lurk above, and company. This warren is home to a whole community of rabbits. And as we quickly learn, these rabbits have a complex society with their own rules and laws. They speak their own language called Lapin, which comes from the French word for rabbit. That's right, it's not just les rabbits. This language is very close to English, but there are several words which have been changed.
Oh, Frith on the hills! He made it all for us!
At the back of the original book, you can find the Lapin glossary, which is helpful because the rabbits don't call things as we call them. To them, a car is a harudadada because of the sound it makes. Going to the toilet is called haraka, and enemies of the rabbits are called ilil. And given how far rabbits are down the food chain, there are a lot of them. These rabbits even have their own names, often linked in some way to nature, like dandelion, hazel, or blackberry. All of this just helps that little bit more to immerse us into the world of these rabbits. Because they are so complex, they come across more like humans than rabbits at times. So it's easier to see ourselves in them, and in doing so, care about their struggles. Because even though this warren has everything a rabbit might need to survive, things aren't all perfect here. Because like with many societies, this warren has a hierarchy. At the top, you have the chief, who makes all of the decisions, and his word is final. Then under the chief, you have the owsler, bigger, tougher rabbits who act as the chief's enforcers. They lay down the law and make sure the rules are being followed, one of which being that no one can leave the warren. And unfortunately, as tends to happen when you give one person power over another, or one rabbit power over another, many of these owsler enforcers abuse their position for their own personal gain. In the first scene of the movie, we see a rabbit being bullied out of a patch of fresh tasty grass that he's found by two of these enforcers under the threat of violence.
Come on, hurry up. Fiver found it, Toadflax.
And we'll eat it.
But this isn't just two rabbits bending the rules, this is the rule. One of the enforcers claiming that this particular plant is only for Owsla.
Coltsford are for Owsla. You know that.
Not for regular rabbits, who unfortunately come in at the bottom of this hierarchy. It's clear that it's not even really a few bad rabbits that are making this system flawed, it's the system itself which is set up to be unfair here. So why stay in this warren if you can't even eat the plants that you find, and you have to constantly take orders from those bigger than you? Well, for safety. There's safety in numbers, and without a shelter, out there with the foxes and the badgers, a rabbit won't last long.
I've never been in a wood before, Hazel. It looks dangerous.
And so, this is the predicament the Sandleford Warren rabbits find themselves in, trapped between safety and freedom, with a mindset of, yeah, this place isn't perfect, but it keeps me alive. And this rabbit society doesn't just have its own rules and laws, but its own mythology too. In the opening of the movie, we learn of the rabbit's god, the creator of everything, who they call Frith, who is really the sun.
Long ago, the great Frith made the world.
And it makes sense why a rabbit would see the sun as a god, for the same reason that countless civilizations have worshipped the sun all throughout history. It's this constant force that brings warmth every day. It's unstoppable and untouchable. All creatures, no matter their size, rely on it, and so the rabbits worship it. Instead of saying Lord knows, they say Frith knows. Instead of saying Oh God, they say Oh Frith. And because Frith is the sun, they call noon, the period when the sun is highest, nigh Frith. Our biggest insight into what kind of god this Frith is comes when we learn of the legend of El Arara. I'm just gonna call him by his other name, the Rabbit Prince. You see, the rabbits believe that long ago, their sun god Frith created the earth to act as an ideal heavenly utopia, where all animals are created equal, and they all get along.
Frith made all the animals and birds, and at first made them all the same.
Here, there is no food chain, and for an animal as far down the food chain as a rabbit, of course this world where there's no prey and no predator would be their idea of utopia, because rabbits are prey to so many animals. In reality, life is hard for a rabbit, that's why they breed and reproduce so rapidly. In order for the species to survive, they have to breed more than they're killed, and they're killed a lot, so they must breed a lot. The average lifespan of a rabbit in captivity is 8 to 12 years, but a rabbit in the wild typically lives less than 2 years. It's rare to see an old rabbit in the wild. But this rapid breeding and rapid killing is baked into their mythology. There's a reason for it. You see, back in this perfect utopia, where all animals got along and ate grass together in the fields, the rabbits were the strongest of all, because with no predators to keep their numbers in check, they could just eat and breed and expand all day with nothing stopping them. But this can only go on for so long, and so comes a food shortage, which angers their sun god Frith. After all, he created this utopia to be fair and equal to all animals, and now the rabbits are beginning to threaten this balance. So Frith orders the Rabbit Prince to control his people, to tell them to stop eating and breeding so much, or he'll have to intervene.
If you cannot control your people, I shall find ways to control them.
But the Prince of the Rabbits is brave and proud, maybe too brave and proud, because he puts the lives and well-being of his people before his own god, telling Frith, "My people are the strongest in the world, we breed faster and eat more, this shows how we love you, Lord Frith, for we are the most responsive to your warmth and light." The Rabbit Prince doesn't see what they're doing as disrupting the balance, he sees it as rabbits taking their rightful place as the most dominant species of them all. And so Frith decides to take action against the rabbits by giving every animal a gift. And in the book we get to learn about some of these gifts. To the blackbird he gives a song, to the cow he gives strength and horns, but most importantly to the fox and the weasel he gives the desire to slay every rabbit. And just like that, the rabbit's greatest threats are born. Predators. The food chain has been created. But the rabbits aren't entirely doomed, because Frith is a fair god. He didn't create the food chain because he dislikes the rabbits, but simply as a way to correct this imbalance of population. And with all of these creatures now coming for the rabbits, he decides to give them a gift too. He finds the rabbit prince and blesses his bottom. Well, he says bottom, but what he means is the tail, giving it strength and speed and warning, so it can forever save the life of its master. And this legend, despite being just a story, does have a lot of truth to it. Even though they're prey to so many animals, despite being so far down the food chain, rabbits have persevered. And their tail plays a big part in this. When being chased, the white on their tails can confuse the predators as the rabbit zigzags away.
By focusing on the bright spot, the would-be predator ignores the larger body of the animal. Then, when the rabbit executes a sharp turn, the spot disappears and the predator has to readjust the focus on the camouflage coat, losing vital seconds in the chase.
And as the sun sets and this sun god disappears beyond the horizon, he leaves the rabbit prince with a message telling him the same words seen on the alternate Watership Down cover.
All the world will be your enemy, prince with 1,000 enemies, and whenever they catch you, they will kill you.
But it's not all doom and gloom, there is hope here too. But first, they must catch you. This legend that the rabbits tell to one another over and over gives them a reason for all this pain and suffering. It's not a product of evolution and the harsh reality of the food chain, it's because their god willed it to be. And he only willed it because they are so great and so strong that they have to be kept in check. He's testing them, and that's why their lives are so hard. It's a way for prey to come to terms with the fact that they're prey. They may not be the biggest or strongest animals, but a clever rabbit still stands a chance of survival. And if they can just make it through the day to sunset and make it through the night to sunrise, then during these hours when the sun is low, the rabbits can come out and play and relax. And their sun god will protect them. What this legend and this story as a whole does such a fantastic job of is making you fear for the rabbits' lives at every given moment. Almost every line in this story is centered around survival.
What do you think will happen when he picks up our scent?
Gets worse and worse the further we go.
We must go on until we reach the hills. Those that go back will not safe.
The rabbits are constantly plotting and planning every move they make just to make it through the day. Even when the rabbits are comfortable, they have to start thinking about their future generation's survival. Life is a constant struggle for this group of rabbits, so I think it's about time we meet them. Now, probably the biggest challenge that this story faces, and arguably its biggest flaw, is that there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of rabbits in Watership Down. And if you've ever looked at a group of wild rabbits, you'll know it's pretty difficult to tell them apart, which can be a big issue when you're trying to tell a complex story with all these different rabbits which all have different personalities. The last thing you want is for the audience to go, oh wait, which rabbit is which? Who's that again? Is that a good rabbit or a bad rabbit? When it comes to the book, this isn't really an issue because anytime a rabbit speaks, you see their name. Blackberry said, Hazel said, Fiver said, so I was never really confused over which rabbit was which. And when it comes to the graphic novel adaptation, which is my personal favourite version of this story, you should definitely go check it out. Even though the wonderful artists really took their time to give the rabbits subtle differences to set them apart, there were still a few times when I had to look back at previous panels and follow their movements to figure out who was who. But when it comes to the movie, the rabbits are pretty much all the exact same colour, the same shade of brown. So when they're running about quickly, or there's a bunch of them in the same frame, it can be really hard keeping track of which rabbit is which. But the movie does have one advantage over these books, and that's voice actors. Each rabbit has a different voice, and it does really help to differentiate them.
It looks like you've come a long way.
Wait here.
It's all around us.
Now stop it, Fiver.
But to be honest, telling the rabbits apart isn't too much of an issue because the important characters all have one distinct trait about them that helps to separate them from the others. The first important rabbit being Fiver, who is arguably the main character of this story, at least in the first half. Fiver is what the rabbits call a seer, meaning he has visions and premonitions of things to come. Anytime something bad's going to happen, Fiver senses it before it does. And this is shown in his character design through his big, wide eyes. Fiver has the largest eyes of any of the rabbits, a sign that he sees more than they do.
The field, it's covered with blood.
Blood?
All of Fiver's premonitions involve death and blood, so he's a very skeptical, skittish character, who at first anyway, the other rabbits don't always take seriously. Some think he's just a warrior, because his claims and visions upset the calm routine the Warren has settled into, and also because Fiver isn't a chief at the top, or a big tough Owsla enforcer. He's a much smaller rabbit, and so holds less influence and power in the Warren. Our first glimpse at Fiver's foresight comes in the very first scene, when he and his brother, Hazel, are up on the fields looking out over the sunset, when they come across a newly constructed sign, but we don't know yet what it says, as well as human footprints, car tracks, nails, and cigarette butts scattered across the field. Before we even see a human in this story, they've left their mark on this patch of nature. Upon seeing these items, Fiver gets a bad feeling, claiming that something terrible is coming and they can't stop it. But his brother Hazel reassures him this blood is just the light from the sunset. Everything is fine. Hazel is a much more confident, reassured rabbit. But everything isn't fine, and Fiver is correct to be worried, because as we later find out, this sign is a notice, a warning of demolition. This whole area is to be redeveloped into real estate. The entire Warren is doomed, as well as the lives of every rabbit who lives there. But because they can't read, stupid rabbits, they have no idea that their complex society, with all its rules and laws and mythology, is about to be destroyed. All except for Fiver.
It's all around us.
Now stop it, Fiver.
Now, it's implied that this gift that Fiver possesses is sort of spiritual, a sort of mythical superpower, but there's a chance that this ability may be linked to the phenomenon known as early warning behaviour, which is when animals flee an area before a natural disaster occurs, long before humans are even aware of anything happening. It's believed this comes from instinct, and admittedly makes a lot more sense when it's something physical and grand like an earthquake or tsunami, because there are slight shifts in the landscape beforehand. Whereas when it comes to humans in boardrooms planning demolition of nature, it is harder to see how an animal could have any foresight of this. But with humans becoming a bigger and bigger threat to rabbits and wildlife with our destruction of their habitats, maybe a few animals have gained the skill to detect this destruction. An evolution of early warning behaviour. But regardless of where it comes from, they see it as a rare gift given to a few chosen rabbits by their sun god to help them protect their people. Just like how he put the power of warning into the Prince Rabbit's tail. Now, in the book, and the graphic novel, there's a really fantastic feature found in the early pages before the story begins, which isn't found in the movie version, and that's a map of the countryside. In particular, the specific patch of countryside in which this entire story takes place, with a key beneath it showing where all of the story's events happen, so you can trace the rabbit's journey as you read through. It begins here, and oh look, it ends here. But this map also serves another function, because it helps us to understand what the rabbits are about to experience. To us, this is a fairly small patch of land. According to Google Maps, you can walk from the town of Kingsclere up here, down to Laverstoke over here, in 3 hours. Their whole grand adventure takes place within this patch, which to us can easily be bulldozed over and destroyed, because there's so much more land out there. This is just a crumb.
Well, you can't hold back progress. Shame though.
The sun god gave all these animals this great desire to hunt down rabbits for the rest of time, but in the end, it's not the food chain, but human development which will destroy this colony. And it seems that life is imitating art, because this story may be fiction, but this destruction of wildlife certainly isn't. Currently, at this very moment, there's an ongoing dispute between developers and some local residents of Sandleford due to a proposal which was granted this year for 350 new homes to be built on Sandleford Nature Park. And if you have a good memory, you'll remember the name of this warren is Sandleford Warren.
We're just to the south of Newbury, near Wash Common, and this is the area that Richard Adams, the author of Watership Down, grew up in. All these arable fields that you see behind me on both sides are going to be turned into 2,000 houses if West Berkshire Council has its way.
There's even a Say No to Sandleford website, which as soon as you click on it, it tells you that what this place is probably best known for is housing this warren from this story, and their goal is to prevent fiction turning into fact. This famous book from 50 years ago is likely one of the biggest reasons that this area hasn't been fully developed, but it seems it might have only delayed the inevitable, so if you're interested, go check out their website. But back to this brilliant work of fiction. So Fiver and Hazel manage to convince Bigwig, one of the tough Owsla enforcers, defined by his rather fancy hair, to grant them an audience with the chief so they can voice their fears over this incoming destruction.
What are you doing here?
We want to see the Chief Rabbit, Bigwig.
And despite being hesitant, Bigwig accepts. In the book, he does this because Hazel is, quote, a sensible fellow. Despite being one of the tough Owlsman enforcers, Bigwig is a fair rabbit. He judges others based on their actions, not their size.
Look, Bigwig, when have I ever asked to see the Chief Rabbit before?
All right, all right.
Unlike the bully enforcers, who steal plants from smaller rabbits, Bigwig looks out for other rabbits, even putting his own reputation on the line if it allows them to be heard. He knows that Fiver's claims are outlandish, and the chief likely won't act on them, but he grants him an audience anyway. He's a valuable member for any warren to have, because he isn't just fair, but he's strong even for an Owsla. As a rabbit, he may be prey, but he certainly doesn't feel like it. And even though he is further up this hierarchy, holding a lot of influence and power, Bigwig is also dissatisfied with how things work here. He's tired of taking orders from the chief, and when we meet the chief, it's easy to understand why. The leader of the Sandleford Warren isn't exactly in his prime. The chief is an old, large rabbit who sits with a pile of plants next to him, eating all day and giving orders all the way from below ground where it's safe, rather than getting directly involved and helping out himself. And speaking to Hazel, he calls him a walnut by mistake, because he doesn't remember his name.
Well, it's been good of you to come, Walnut.
Despite Hazel telling the chief it just moments before, implying this chief is far removed from the lives of everyday rabbits in his warren. The chief is just another example of this system being broken. He's clearly too old to lead efficiently, and should really step down and give his position to someone more capable and invested.
Hazel? It is Hazel, isn't it?
But from what it seems, it's always been like this. He's always been the chief, even if the warren has to suffer for it. And in the chief's defense, he does listen to Fiver's worries, but he doesn't act on them. Which is understandable. Fiver, out of the blue, proposes that the entire warren flees, but he doesn't have any physical evidence to back up his claims. Just these visions. But it's really the way that he reacts to these claims that shows a lot about this chief. After Fiver and Hazel leave, the chief calls them lunatics and chews out Bigwig for wasting his time.
Bigwig! Bigwig, sir.
This seems to be the breaking point for Bigwig. After all, he's the only member of the Owsla we see who seems to look out for the smaller rabbits. And now he's being punished for simply allowing a rabbit to have his voice heard. And so he decides to leave the Owsla enforcers. And not only that, but the warren too. You see, many of the rabbits have heard Fiver's claims of blood in the fields and listened in on his meeting with the chief. And word spreads fast in this warren. Fiver may not have any physical proof, but he has a history of being correct. This isn't his first premonition, and this isn't the first to come true either. So many rabbits believe his claims, and this belief, mixed with some of the smaller rabbits feeling fed up of this unfair system, leads to several members of the warren deciding to hatch a plan to escape into the night. But unfortunately, most are scooped up by the Owsla enforcers. And it's not surprising the enforcers are much less eager to leave this warren, because they hold so much power here. They get the best food, the best beds, and they don't want to give that up. You see, the Owlslers' power doesn't just come from their strength alone, it comes from being stronger than the smaller rabbits. Without them here in the warren, they have no one to wield their power over, and so they can't have the rabbits leave freely, or this hierarchy will crumble, and the Owlsler will fall to the bottom. Think of it like this: if everyone in the country suddenly became a police officer, then being a police officer would mean nothing. This system only works with all parties involved. But luckily, with Bigwig's help, Fiver, Hazel, and some other rabbits managed to escape the warren. And this group of rabbits are the ones we follow throughout the rest of the story, as they struggle to survive without the safety of the warren, and hopefully find a new home out there somewhere, where they can finally be free. And even though they don't know it yet, they made the right choice by believing in Fiver and leaving when they do, because shortly after, that blood on the horizon reaches the warren. And even though, like I said, my favourite version of this story is the graphic novel, I can't deny that the way the movie shows this sequence in which the burrow is destroyed is a lot more impactful. You see, in the book and the graphic novel, the destruction is fairly literal. They show the digger coming, then the men blocking the entrances to the burrow before pumping gas in. It shows this tragedy as it happened, but I don't think it fully communicates all of the fear, the terror, and the sheer level of destruction that the rabbits feel in this moment, whereas the movie takes a much more abstract, artistic approach, with some really striking imagery and bold colours to convey emotion.
Runs blocked with dead bodies.
It begins by looking up out of the burrow at the sunset, as dirt falls into the hole, blocking out any sunlight. And as we know, the sun is the rabbits' god, their friend. And not only this, sunset is when the rabbits are protected by their Lord Frith. It's as though in this moment, their god has left them, and taken his protection with him. Plus, there's no face to these men who fill in these burrows. In fact, there's no face to any of the men in this movie. You see, maybe a shoulder, the back of a head, but never the face. Which is a smart choice, because the rabbits don't see them as individual people like we do. When we see a person's face, it helps to humanize them. Maybe they look like someone you know. You can tell a lot about them, make up a whole backstory for them. But to the rabbits, it doesn't matter who we are, we're just this destructive force called men, a blanket term. And so if they showed us any of these men's faces, then that would give us a specific person or handful of men to hate. When the truth is, this sort of thing happens all over the place all of the time, and there is no one person to be angry at. Development and destruction of wildlife isn't down to a couple men, it's a whole system. It's hard to admit, but at one point, all of our homes were once home to wildlife.
Men have always hated us.
No, they just destroyed the warren because we were in their way.
This story does such a fantastic job of making us feel like one of the rabbits, of getting us fully immersed into their society with their rules, the way they think, their mythology, their language, that you almost forget for a moment that we are the rabbit's greatest enemy. And despite being aimed towards younger audiences, this story doesn't pull any punches in addressing this. It really does not shy away from the destruction of this warren.
Warren, earth, roots, grass.
And not just the destruction of the warren, because the home being destroyed is sad, yes. But what's really the tragedy here is the society of rabbits who live within it. And this movie knows it would be a disservice to not show the pain of these rabbits, and so it goes all out, giving us what I think is the most haunting imagery of the film. When, after the entrances have been blocked, they decided to bring the focus to the rabbits' faces, showing many of them, all panicked with wide red bloodshot eyes, as they collide into one ball, one mass of rabbits, overlapping each other, fighting for space. Then, the rabbits begin to overlap so much that all we see is a collection of red eyes poking out, taking up the whole screen, as though they're fighting for room in the frame itself. Everything about this sequence, and this shot in particular, just screams claustrophobia, and I think for the graphic novel, they could have probably just drawn this over a whole page, and it would have done the job. it would have communicated everything needed about this destruction visually. Then the sequence ends with bright green grass being ripped up. But this isn't like the subdued, more realistic shade of grass that we see throughout the rest of the movie. No, they make this grass feel as vibrant and lush as possible, the claw of the digger tearing into it to reveal red directly underneath, as though the ground itself is bleeding. This sequence really makes the warren feel like it's a living creature that's being killed in this moment, which honestly isn't all that far from the truth. If you take out this entire warren, then what are the predators going to feed on? It's not just the rabbits that are at stake here, it's the whole food chain, this whole system of life which will be damaged. And just like that, every rabbit who stayed behind is dead. It's like a sequence out of a horror movie, not a movie with a universal age rating. And I hope you're starting to see why this movie might have affected me so much as a young child. Now, even if the rabbits who fled wanted to, there's no going back. So where do they end up next? Well, after a good amount of time spent on the move, while taking a rest, the group are approached by a rabbit they do not recognise, called Cowslip.
Who are you? What do you want?
My name is Cowslip, and I don't want anything.
Who invites the group back to his warren, as there's plenty of space for any rabbit who wishes to stay. The group are hesitant at first, but they don't have many other options, and if this rabbit is really telling the truth, then they've hit the jackpot. Right after leaving their home, they presented a brand new one, but this rabbit seems sly. He talks in a very playful way.
Oh, it's you, is it? How nice. We're so glad you've come.
He almost comes across like Scar in The Lion King, where what he's saying is nice and fairly normal, but there's a slight sarcastic tone to it, as though he knows more than he's letting on.
It looks like you've come a long way.
So you feel like you can't really trust him, but as of now, he's given you no reason not to. In the movie, Cowslip looks fairly similar to the other rabbits, but in the graphic novel, he's always smiling. He looks mischievous, almost too friendly, too inviting. Out here in the wild, where survival comes first, what could this rabbit possibly want from a group of refugees? This whole situation almost seems too good to be true, and this becomes more apparent when the rabbits do decide to go with Cowslip to his warren, which seems like a paradise. Here, the rabbits don't just have an abundance of space, but food too.
Help yourself to flavour. There are fresh roots here daily.
In fact, a human, a farmer who lives nearby, comes out every day and lays out tasty vegetables for all the rabbits to feed on. Instead of shooting them or gassing them, this man seems like their friend. And the rabbits in Cowslip's warren have developed new skills and techniques. They've taught themselves how to pick up food and carry it back to the warren for later, something which the other rabbits have never even thought to do. When it comes to their ideas and how they do things, this warren seems more progressive than traditional. And this is made clear when one of the rabbits we've been following brings up their god, Frith, and the legend of the Rabbit Prince.
Why don't you tell us a story of El Arera? El Arera and his trickery don't really mean very much to us.
Cowslip calls these tales quaint old stories and holds little value in them and their lessons. This warren has left the mythology behind, instead focusing on the reality of their situation, adapting to the world as it is today. And I mean, from what it seems, turning their back on the sun god seems to be working out for this new warren. They have everything they need. Here, everyone can eat as much as they like. There's no need to reserve certain plants for bigger rabbits, because every rabbit is a bigger rabbit. But anytime our group asks any questions about this new warren and how it operates, they're given no answer.
Where are all the others? Please, eat all you like. We'll leave you to your...
You see, with how much rabbits breed, warrens are usually overcrowded, yet this one is practically empty. It doesn't add up. But Cowslip avoids these questions altogether. He doesn't even acknowledge them, as though if he tells the truth, the group won't be happy with what they hear. Or it suits him better to keep these newcomers in the dark. Even the way this new warren is presented visually, it's clear that Cowslip is up to something. When the group are feeding on these tasty new vegetables, the camera just circles them like a predator circling its prey, making them feel trapped, and we see all of the rabbits of this warren peeking in on the newcomers. It's clear they don't want to interact with them, but we don't yet know why. And naturally, Fiver, with his foresight, is the first to sense something is off about this place.
It feels like mist, like being deceived and losing our way.
After all, Fiver is a believer in the story of Frith and the Rabbit Prince. He believes that everything is out to get them, everyone is their enemy, and life cannot be this easy for a rabbit. And this is almost immediately proven to be the case when he and Bigwig are up on the surface, and as Bigwig walks away, he's caught in a snare trap. And by the time that they manage to break him free, he's in a pretty bad state. In this moment, the rabbits come to a chilling realization. Fiver, just like before, is correct. This place is too good to be true. You see, the reason the rabbits were welcomed into this new warren with open arms, or open paws I should say, isn't out of the goodness of their hearts, it's a survival mechanism. Every day, the farmer comes through his land, scaring away any predators, meaning the rabbits can do what rabbits do best, breed and feed, and with no predators, grow big, helped in fact by the abundance of vegetables left out for them. He isn't feeding these rabbits because he cares about them, he's fattening them up and laying traps all over the meadow, so he can catch and eat them. But the real twisted part of all this is that Cowslip and the rabbits who live here don't just know about this system, they feed into it. It's like a deal with the devil. They stay in this meadow and eat the farmer's delicious food, fattening themselves up for the price of the occasional rabbit going missing in one of these traps. This is why the warren is so empty and why they take in any new rabbits who come across the meadow. Because the way this system works, the more rabbits they take in, who aren't aware of these traps, the better their odds of survival become. They no longer tell the tales of the Rabbit Prince or Lord Frith, because now they serve a new god. This human who feeds some and kills others, who gives and takes away. It's just as Cowslip said, a rabbit should know their place, and here it's at the hands of a human. And it's not really all that surprising that these rabbits would leave their sun god behind in favour of a human. After all, Frith's perfect utopia and what seems like his main goal is a world where nature is perfectly balanced. When the rabbit population got too large, he introduced predators to cut them down. When the rabbits were being too cut down, he introduced gifts to help them survive.
Prince Rabbit, if you cannot control your people, I shall find ways to control them.
But you know what else, aside from rabbits, have spread all over the world? Humans. Except we haven't really been cut down by predators because we're at the top of the food chain. At this point, we just keep growing and expanding and nothing's really stopping it, at least not yet anyway. And so humans' existence in this story kind of goes against the rabbit's god and mythology, which is probably why we're missing from it. There's no mention of any humans in any of the rabbit stories. I mean, at one point, a rabbit is caught in the jaws of a cat. His fate is sealed, he's facing certain death. But a human girl comes down and saves him because she thinks the rabbit is cute. It's like an act of divine intervention, this little girl overriding the food chain, or even the destruction of the warren. The humans come in, reshape the land, and wipe out not just every single rabbit, but every bit of life in that area. Both of these acts sound like something only a god could do, at least to the rabbits anyway. This is why Cowslip's warren have left their sun god behind. This, and well, it's easier on their conscience. They know that what they're doing here in luring other rabbits to their death is immoral, and by hearing these stories of this brave mythical rabbit prince who would do anything for his people, it would be a constant reminder of just how different from this great rabbit they've become, turning a blind eye to the death of their fellow rabbits if it means they can live a little bit longer. But the rabbits we've been following so far, Fiver, Hazel, Bigwig, and the others, aren't like this. They do look out for one another. They do put themselves in danger to help out their fellow rabbits, even if it may lead to their own death. They're inspired by the stories of the brave rabbit prince and try their best to be like him. They do have a leader, but they all come to decisions together. It's much more of a fair democracy than the warrens we've seen so far, because what this group want want more than anything is freedom. They came from a warren where certain rabbits can eat certain plants, and where bigger rabbits abuse their power over others. And now they found this new warren where, yes, there's no leader or rules about what you can and can't eat, but they're forced to turn a blind eye to the death of their friends. They're paying for this paradise with their morals, so they're still not truly free. So the group decides that instead of trying to fit into someone else's warren with its pre-established rules and laws, why not start their own? Somewhere where they can build it from the ground up, in their own image. And the place they decide on is at the top of a hill, a little place called Watership Down. Wait a second, that's the name of the movie, and the book that it's based off of, and the graphic novel adaptation. Now, just as Rome wasn't built in a day, neither is a warren, and the group face many challenges in forming their new home. The main one being that in their group, they have no female rabbits, or does as they're called. They have no woman to reproduce with. Maybe these rabbits aren't so different from us after all. And if they can't find any does, then this dream of a new warren won't last long. But the rabbits get lucky when they find an injured seagull lying in the grass, with its wing damaged, and a bird without wings in the wild is as good as dead. So the rabbits decide to help this seagull by bringing him dead sticks filled with grubs and worms dug up from the ground. In the book, they also help a mouse who is being chased by a bird of prey. This is far from the every man for himself mindset of the previous warrens. Watership Down will be built on helping one another and growing stronger together. The rabbits do these selfless acts with no expectation of anything in return from these animals, just because they believe it's the right thing to do. But these kind, selfless acts end up coming back around and helping them out in the long run. They become good karma, because this mouse they save ends up warning them about incoming danger, and this injured seagull is the rabbit's key to finding some does. It can fly high and see much further than any rabbit can, looking all over for any sign of does. And the rabbits and the seagull form an unlikely friendship, given that seagulls have been known to attack and sometimes eat rabbits. Being a children's story, which was originally written for the author's daughters, it's not surprising that he would want to instill more positive lessons. The first half may be very bleak, with characters doing immoral things for their own good, but in the second half, it really becomes about animals working together and bravery. And just as the tone of the movie changes going into the second half, so does the lead character, as Fiverr really takes a backseat here, and it's actually Hazel who comes into the spotlight, becoming the main driving force of the story, as he is actually the chief of the group. Despite not being the biggest or the strongest rabbit of the bunch, Hazel has more respect than any other rabbit in their party, because the rabbits of Watership Down value something more than size and strength, and that's bravery. Hazel is a fearless rabbit. Anytime the group run into danger, Hazel is the first to offer himself up as a distraction. Unlike the slow, overfed chief of the Sandleford Warren, who sits deep underground away from any danger, giving others orders. If a job needs to be done, it is Hazel who will do it himself. When walking into danger, he says, "It's a slim chance, but as Chief Rabbit, I have to take it, alone." Which sounds like something the Rabbit Prince would say, as every single tale we learn about him revolves around him placing the well-being of every rabbit above everything, even his own life. Now, this tale isn't found in the movie adaptation, but in the book, there's a pretty important section called The Story of the Black Rabbit, which gives us a really good insight into why the rabbits see the Rabbit Prince as this great mythical hero. In this story, the rabbits were facing certain death. The Beaver King and his people hated the rabbits, and so decided to gather and sit outside of their rabbit holes, attacking any who stepped outside. They wanted to force the rabbits to starve, so the Rabbit Prince gets his people to run out all at once and cause a distraction, so he can run off and get help from the one being powerful enough to kill every last beaver, the Black Rabbit of Death. You see, the rabbits don't just have their own version of God in Frith, but their own version of death too. This Black Rabbit, whose sole purpose is to ensure that all rabbits pass over when it's their time to go. The rabbits have an expression for him.
The Black Rabbit serves Lord Frith, but he does no more than his appointed task.
And through this expression, it's clear that the rabbits don't see death as evil, just an essential part of the circle of life. He's a servant of their god. They're working towards the same goal, ensuring the rabbit population stays balanced. The black rabbit and the sun god aren't enemies, they work in tandem. Where Frith brings life and light, the black rabbit brings death and darkness, which is why the black rabbit is also known as the moon god. And I think it's honestly so refreshing to have a depiction of death in a children's story which isn't this figure of pure evil, to show kids that death is natural. It can be sad, but it's not out to get you. But even though the Black Rabbit may not be evil, he is extremely powerful. And so the Rabbit Prince stakes everything on being able to convince the Black Rabbit to take care of his beaver problem. When the Rabbit Prince eventually finds him, he offers up his own life in exchange for the lives of his people. But the Black Rabbit refuses. To him, death is a certainty that cannot be avoided. It can't be traded like playing cards. If rabbits are allowed to start swapping their lives for others, then where does it end? It may seem like a fair deal for this one great rabbit to sacrifice himself for his people, but death isn't fair. It doesn't choose those who most deserve it. And so instead, the Black Rabbit offers the prince a wager. He proposes a series of challenges, and if the prince can beat the Black Rabbit at any one of them, then he will save his people. But each time the prince loses, he must give up a part of himself. At first, it's his tail, then his whiskers, and finally his ears, all of which are the rabbit's greatest protections against threats. Without these, a rabbit is as good as dead. But after losing these, the prince doesn't waver or run scared. He carries on trying anything to save his people. So he goes deep into the Black Rabbit's warren and finds a pit filled with fleas carrying diseases, purposefully infecting himself before leaving the warren and beginning the journey home, knowing he'll die from the diseases but hoping the beavers do too. But the Black Rabbit informs him that fleas are carried by rabbits' ears, which the prince no longer has. His plan is hopeless, so he gives up. He lies on the cold rock and waits to die, knowing he's failed his people. But the Black Rabbit is so impressed by his courage and strength and the lengths he'll go to save his people that he finally agrees to save the rabbits. And not only this, the sun god Frith is so impressed that he blesses the Rabbit Prince with a brand new set of ears. And when the prince returns to the warren, he arrives to see the Black Rabbit's Owslet enforcers chasing the beavers away. The prince has saved his people through none other than bravery. And with every act, Hazel follows in this brave prince's footsteps. When the group are on a mission to a nearby barn to break out some does, a farmer comes out and shoots at the rabbits. And Hazel is the one who runs off to distract him, getting shot in the leg in the process, sacrificing a part of himself for his people. And when enemy rabbits arrive at Watership Down's door, intending to kill the group who are hiding below ground, facing certain death, Hazel is the one to run off and find the only animal he knows that can kill this stronger army pressing down on them, a mean, scary black dog. Setting it free so the other rabbits can lure it back to the enemy rabbits and chase them away. During this mission, Hazel is caught in the jaws of a barn cat and is facing certain death. But just as the Rabbit Prince was saved by a higher power coming down and blessing him with new ears and a second chance, Hazel is saved by a little girl who manages to get the cat to drop him before releasing him back into the wild so he can return to his people, having fully completed his transformation into a great rabbit hero, worthy of the Rabbit Prince. But unfortunately, this parallel is lost in the movie adaptation because we never learn this story. And I understand why. Animation is expensive, and this movie probably was already a struggle to make at just 90 minutes long, but it is still a shame because I think this parallel is the most interesting part of the second half of the story, and without it, it becomes a bit more straightforward than what we got in the first half, for a couple reasons. The main one being that the second half really scales back on the darker darker, more realistic themes. It becomes good versus evil, black versus white, whereas before, everything lies very much in the grey. I mean, even the way they show death, we go from that horrific scene showing the Warren's destruction in the first half, to not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 fake-out deaths in the second. You have Bigwig getting caught in the snare trap, and everyone fully believes he's dead. They throw out a little prayer for him, it cuts to black.
For my friends, stop running today.
But then a couple seconds later, he gets up and he's fine. Okay, fair enough. Then when running through a nearby farm, Hazel is shot and presumed dead. But Fiver finds him and the bullet only hit his leg, so he's okay. Okay, still fair enough. Then Bigwig gets into a fight and it seems like he dies, but then it's revealed he survives. And then Hazel finds himself in the jaws of a cat, and the little girl comes down and saves him, setting him free. Granted, this last one isn't so bad because it shows how much power humans hold over rabbits and nature, but still, 1 fake out death, okay. But 4, that's pushing it a little bit.
4
fake out deaths.
Jeremy, 4? That's insane.
Because each time they do one, it makes you fear for the lives of the rabbits a little bit less. And that's what the first half of this story did such a good job of. Making the rabbits' lives feel like they could be snuffed out at any moment. They weren't scared to kill off these cute rabbits. And yeah, maybe that's because it's a warren of nameless rabbits, so it's not as emotionally overwhelming. But I don't know, I still found it pretty sad, and I'm a grown boy. And again, I know this is a story aimed towards a younger audience, but I'd like to remind you there is death in this movie and story, and quite a lot of it. I just wish it was a little bit more spread out. And even though overall I do like the final villain of the story, he does seem a bit more black and white than what came before, at least in the movie anyway. His name is Woundwort, a huge, tough, scarred rabbit who puts even Bigwig to shame. He leads a massive warren called the Afrafra, which is essentially a rabbit prison camp taking on a military-inspired system. You see, Woundwort isn't a chief, he's a general, and everything here runs like clockwork. It's all controlled. Your role, what you can eat, when you can eat, who you can mate with.
And if you want a dough, you have your choice here. You're not an officer for nothing.
And the punishments for defying orders or trying to escape are incredibly harsh. You're taken before a council and potentially ripped to shreds. Now, in theory, the General is a perfect villain for the Watership Down rabbits to face off against, because he is the complete opposite of freedom with how he runs his warren. It's like a bigger, badder version of the Sandleford warren, the very thing the rabbits escaped from. And the reason I say the General is a bit less nuanced in the movie version is that we never really learn what his motivations are. We know he wants desperately to keep all of the rabbits under him from leaving, but we never really find out why. Why has he created such an oppressive society? Compare the General to a villain like Cowslip, who has such a short time in this story but leaves such an impact because of how twisted and nuanced he is. We might not agree with him, but we understand why he's doing what he's doing. And I honestly wish that he was the main villain because his wildly different philosophy to the Sandleford rabbits makes for a really interesting dynamic. I could honestly talk about Cowslip for an hour, but there's just not that much to say about the General. Don't get me wrong, he serves his purpose as a big tough rabbit with a whole bunch of goons for our heroes to face off against, but in the movie that's about it, at least for me anyway, and I'm interested to see if you have a different opinion. But probably the biggest change between the books and the movie is actually the ending. After the battle between the Watership Down rabbits and the General, we get a pretty substantial time jump. Now, Hazel is an old rabbit, and the Warren seems to have thrived under his care as chief for many years. But despite surviving predators and gunshots and a whole army of rabbits, there's one thing Hazel, and anyone for that matter, can't beat: old age. And as he watches out over his people, none other than the Black Rabbit of Death comes to him, offering him a spot in his squad of ghostly Owsler chiefs.
I've come to ask if you would like to join my Owsler.
Now, in the books, it's actually the Rabbit Prince, not the Black Rabbit, who comes to Hazel in his moment of death. And him and Hazel leap off into the sunset together. And at first, I wasn't sure how I felt about this ending, because in the novel, the Black Rabbit's Owsla, who he wants Hazel to become a part of, are described as ghastly and shadowy, which are nothing like the traits that Hazel holds, this brave, strong character who inspires so much hope. To me, it seems much more fitting that he joined the Rabbit Prince. But after a few rewatches, this alternate ending has come around on me a little bit, because for one, the Rabbit Prince isn't as much of a presence in the movie. He's only in the opening scene with the legend of Frith, so him showing back up at the end would be a little bit confusing. And also, I think by Death himself coming to take Hazel away, it helps to soften him.
You needn't worry about them. They'll be alright.
And again, I think it's important for children to see a version of Death who is kind and reasonable, and to see this brave hero go with him willingly and without fear. This whole movie has been about nature, both its beauty and its cruelty, and death is a natural thing, so I think it's good to end the movie with one last final reminder of this, because despite being taken by death, it still feels like a happy ending. Again, it's rare to see an old rabbit in the wild, and even rarer to see a rabbit killed by old age in the wild. In a strange way, this is a massive win for Hazel. In the end, he gets to look out one last time over his people, and be reassured that they'll be fine, and the movie ends with Frith's message to the rabbit, the same one from the opening.
All the world will be your enemy, prince with 1,000 enemies.
Even though most of this movie has proven the first half of the message true, with all of the death and danger coming to catch the rabbits and kill them, the ending proves the last part of the message true. Yes, death and danger will always be coming for them, but first they have to be caught. And if these rabbits can be anything like Hazel with his tricks and bravery, then their odds are better than most.
But first they must catch you.
I know I usually like to talk about movies which have really dark, depressing endings, but it was really nice for a change to talk about a story which, yes, is very dark throughout, but in the end has a pretty hopeful message despite all the darkness. Because this is a story aimed towards children, and the way it depicts rabbits using their mind more than their strength is a really great lesson to anyone who reads it. Anyone who may feel like prey, whether it be bullied at school or even feeling like they aren't respected due to their size or physical appearance, whatever it may be, I can see the story providing a lot of comfort for the children who read the book or watched the movie over the years. Yeah, this film has a lot of stuff which younger children can just enjoy and be entranced with, that they don't have to think too much about. The rabbits trying to cross the road or the river or running from scary animals. But it also takes risks, it tackles some really deep philosophical themes, and even though not every child watching will pick up on them, maybe some of it will get through, and they may actually learn some valuable lessons. And I think that's part of the reason why so many parents chose to show this to their kids when they were young, even with the heavy themes and occasional rabbit being torn apart. Well, that and it's animated. I just asked my mum whether she remembers showing me this, and what she did say is that she gave the DVD to a friend of hers, thinking it was for really young children, which, I mean, the box says it is, and the child ended up crying, so take of that what you will. My next video is on a similarly deep children's story, which also happens to be based on a book written by a man for his daughters with a graphic novel adaptation, but more on this next month, so subscribe or you might wake up with buttons for eyes. Yeah, it's Coraline.
Hungry, aren't you?
Or you might wake up with split personality, because I also might do Severance next month, because Severance is currently airing, so it makes sense. Either way, those will be the next two. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Goodbye.